Hi, and welcome back to another video. And today we'll be talking about the news that broke yesterday on the upcoming Georgia Senate race for 2026, where honestly I'd argue Republicans' strongest candidate for 2026 Senate races, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, will not be running for Senate. There's been a lot of Republicans that have been trying to push Brian Kemp to run for Senate against the incumbent Democrat Senator Jon Ossoff. Why is that? Because Brian Kemp has constantly been performing very well in the polls against Jon Ossoff. There wasn't a single poll that Brian Kemp and Jon Ossoff were in that Brian Kemp lost. Brian Kemp led all the polls, and because all the polls were saying that Brian Kemp would have defeated Jon Ossoff, and now Brian Kemp says he is not going to be running for Senate. Obviously, he can't run for governor, and in my personal opinion, he's probably going to be wanting for. He's probably going to want to. He's going to be running for the presidency, 2028. I doubt he'd be successful, but that seems to be what his political ambitions are for the future. Either that or he's retiring, and I don't think he's going to retire. I think he's going to run for the presidency in 2028, and I don't think he's going to be successful. I still believe that J.D. Vance, obviously will become the 2028 Republican nominee, but still, we have a long way to go. And now we have just learned that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, is not going to be running for the Senate. And now Republicans have this really difficult task of finding a new candidate that would be, as strong as Brian Kemp would have been to, run against Jon Ossoff and defeat him. Jon Ossoff is a very popular Democrat senator that was able to win and obviously an election cycle of 2020 that favored Democrats a lot. When it came down to it, Jon Ossoff winning a very, very small margin here against the then incumbent Republican senator, David Perdue. This was actually a runoff election where Jon Ossoff won. Jon Ossoff actually lost the original election, but because no other party or either candidate were able to win a majority, there was a runoff election, and Jon Ossoff lucked out, and he won that runoff election. Also, same with, his colleague, Raphael Warnock, who won by 2 points, and we also saw 2 years later where Raphael Warnock, won again by 2 points. Well, actually, I do believe he's improving his margin there. Improving his margin there by just a couple other points here. But still, Jon Ossoff, up for re-election again, very popular Democrat senator, and I think he'd probably improve his margin unless Republicans find a strong candidate like Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp not running here. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp will not run for Senate in 2026, putting an already competitive seat up for grabs. The popular Republican would have been a prime recruit against first-term Democrat Senator Jon Ossoff. I have decided that being on the ballot next year is not the right decision for me and my family, Kemp sent in a statement post on X. I spoke with President Trump and Senate leaders earlier today and expressed my commitment to work along them to ensure we have a strong Republican nominee who could win next November. So, Brian Kemp, who would have been probably the strongest Republican Senate candidate in the entire election cycle of 2026, not running. Obviously, this makes it a really, really difficult task by the Republicans, especially Georgia Republicans, to find another candidate who would have been stronger than Brian Kemp. And I don't think they're going to be doing it because for a while now, for months now, we have heard two names come up, for the Republican primary, but especially for the Senate race on the Republican side, which was Brian Kemp and also Marjorie Taylor Greene, who isn't exactly a very popular politician. She is a very unpopular Republican congressman who is very, very controversial. She's constantly arguing with other people in Congress. However, she is very popular within MAGA, and I wouldn't put it past it, for her to be able to win a primary. I think that if she ran a primary, she'd probably get hundreds of thousands of donations. She'd probably win the primary, but she'd probably lose the general election by a huge margin. And if you don't believe me, there are polls to back this up. Only a couple days ago, there was this poll posted that Marjorie Taylor Greene would come last in a Georgia Senate poll, where she would actually lose to Jon Ossoff by a huge margin. A new poll from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution conducted between April 15 and April 24th among 1,000 registered Georgia voters found that voters preferred Ossoff over Greene by a 17-point margin. The largest gap in the survey in a hypothetical race with Democrat getting 54% of the vote compared to 37% for the Congresswoman. 17-point margin. If this poll was accurate, Marjorie Taylor Greene would lose the Senate race by a 17-point margin. Now, obviously, that is not something something common we see in Senate races now in modern American politics. However, that would make a lot of sense, especially with her popularity, which I can see here that this goes on with. The result was largely driven by Greene's unpopularity with independents, 60% of whom said they would back Ossoff in a matchup, and moderate Republicans, with nearly 10% of Trump voters saying they would also back the incumbent. This actually is kind of a surprise to me because I usually assume, and so do many others, that Trump voters usually stick with MAGA Republicans. So obviously this is a clear minority and nowhere close to the majority. This is only a small fraction of Trump voters, but still 10% of Trump voters in Georgia saying that they would back Jon Ossoff instead of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, remind you, that just recently elected Donald Trump in Georgia. Donald Trump just won Georgia, not even just months ago, by 2 points. He defeated the Vice President Kamala Harris by 2 points. Now 10% of the voters who voted for him are saying they would have backed Jon Ossoff. They would have backed Jon Ossoff instead of the very MAGA Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, which really shows how unpopular Marjorie Taylor really does show. Poll at a margin of error plus or minus 3.1 percentage points. But yeah, truly incredible here. It really shows that Marjorie Taylor Greene does not match Brian Kemp's popularity at all. It really shows how weak of a candidate she is. And like I've mentioned before, I think that if Marjorie Taylor Greene were to run, I think she'd win the primary probably easily, and that she'd probably lose the general election. I don't think it'd be by 17 points. I think it'd be around by maybe 7 to 8 points, is my guess. Now, we've seen unpopular candidates in Georgia Senate races before. We have seen them before. In 2022, we saw what happened when you put up a weak candidate. In 2022, in the Senate race against Raphael Warnock, we saw, against Warnock, we saw Walker. Very, very weak Republican candidate that Donald Trump put up, lost by, very close margin of 2.8%, but still, this was a very, very close, election cycle that both benefited both parties, but usually more Republican. If the abortion issue wasn't a thing in this election cycle, the Democrats would have been wiped out, right? They would have lost Pennsylvania, they would have lost Nevada and Arizona and Georgia, but instead, we saw Democrats perform very well, even in Ohio, where J.D. Vance only won by 6 points. Also in Wisconsin, where Republicans almost lost this one. Pennsylvania was a blip for John Fetterman, winning by 5 points. And North Carolina was also very close. And Georgia obviously went well for the Democrats. And so if the Georgia Republicans put up another weak candidate, I predict that the horrible performance by Walker in 2022 will be nothing compared to what it would be by a weak candidate like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I do believe that Marjorie Taylor Greene would probably easily win the primary, but she'd get smoked. I don't think it'd be a 17-point, loss. I think it'd be much closer than that, but not as close as, this 2-point squeaker for Warnock. I think that Jon Ossoff is very, very popular, and I think that he probably has what it takes to win here, even if the candidate wasn't Marjorie Taylor Greene, even if it was somebody else. And we still have a long way to go here. But yeah, Brian Kemp no longer in here now. He is now in the, where is it here? He's now in the declined summary here. Here we go. Brian Kemp, Governor of Georgia, 2022 president. He is now in decline, but we still have a lot of candidates here in the Republican primary that express interest, right? We have Buddy Carter, we have Mike Collins, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, we have Tyler Harper, we have John King, we have Rich McCormick. We have all these other people. Obviously, potential is Brad Raffensperger, Georgia Secretary of State. But I think that if Republicans want to put in a strong candidate, they should probably put, somebody they should probably nominate somebody who was close to Brian Kemp, who worked with him a lot, not the lieutenant governor, and probably not the Secretary of State, but somebody very high up in the ranks who, has close ties to Brian Kemp, who can run on the accomplishments, and who could probably defeat Jon Ossoff. Now, do I think Georgia Republicans will do that? Probably not. I don't think they do that. But if they did, they probably have a pretty good chance of defeating Jon Ossoff. Now, Jon Ossoff is already a declared candidate, with raising $31 million, he's already spent $25 million of it, and he already has $11 million on hand. Jon Ossoff and his campaign have a lot of money. Obviously, Raphael Warnock has endorsed him. We'll probably see more endorsements in the coming months here, especially when we get into 2026. But Jon Ossoff is probably going to be the only candidate declared here in this Democratic primary. The Democrats obviously want to eliminate as much competition as possible for Jon Ossoff, who is a very, very, very vulnerable senator. But as popular as he is, especially in a Trump midterm year, I think Jon Ossoff will probably win by 3 to 5 points. 3 points is probably the lowest I'd give it, unless Republicans somehow to manage to put in a candidate that is as strong or even stronger than Brian Kemp. But as of right now, it seems very unlikely, and it seems very likely that Jon Ossoff will probably hold on to the seat, win re-election, and yeah, Democrats will retain the seat and control it for another 6 years. But we still have a long way to go, and it's only a matter of time till we see something change or shift. But anyways, that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.